Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Today I wanted to go over some residency project shortcuts, and I know it seems a little bit early to even focus on the residency project here in May, but when you're talking about a residency project, a lot of the three biggies that we need to figure out can be done ahead of time, or you can kind of get an idea. So the first thing is you want to figure out what you want to do for your project. Second, it's designing the poster. And third is writing the abstract with objective, methods, results, conclusion. And what takes so much time is indecision and to some extent procrastination, but APHA, not ASHP, but APHA just released a virtual poster session, and there's over 300 posters there. And many of you are APHA ASP members. You can look at it. And the first thing you'll want to do is download what is a PDF of all of the posters, the abstracts, and all of that. It's around 300 pages. It's going to be a tremendous resource when this time comes, and it'll come pretty quickly. So what I want to go over, I always like to go over three things, is one, figuring out your project, two, designing the poster, and three, writing the abstract, and how we can use that APHA resource to help you do it. So again, there are almost 400 posters up, and there's ways to see immediately some do's and don'ts and how you can make it a lot quicker and have shortcuts. So the first thing that I looked at was, what interests you? And this is a lot easier to do. They've got 60 posters per page, but what you're looking for right now, not even really looking at the content, don't click on the posters themselves. First thing we want to look at is what words are jumping out at you. What are the things that, based on what you care about, or certainly what the site might care about, what are the things that really are interesting to you? And keywords could include something like exercise or weight loss, vaccination, shortage, in particular maybe the heparin shortage, wellness, things like that. And what will happen is you'll start kind of getting an idea of those topics that are interesting to you, and you can start seeing how people would approach those particular topics. So if you're going to have something that's inpatient heparin shortage versus an outpatient weight loss, you're going to have very, very, very different projects. So the first thing you want to do is kind of see, okay, well, what seems interesting to me that I would want to move forward with as whether it's an inpatient resident, a community resident. And because it's APHA, you're going to see a lot of community work as well, and it's kind of nice balance to it. So the second thing you want to do is, after you've gone through those 7 pages and kind of picked out some words, without looking at the titles, only start looking at those posters that your eye immediately is attracted to. Don't worry about the content or anything like that, and start saving those images. It's much less clear when you're going through the actual poster session, if we were at APHA in DC, than it is online. But immediately you can see that there are many posters that you are completely not interested in, just based on looking at it. And the same thing is true with a book cover. Some book covers are like, wow, that's really interesting, and you're immediately kind of drawn to it. And then on the other hand, some of them are not interesting at all. And generally it's because either it's all text, or there's very few graphics, or the graphics really don't make sense. Like, why is there one single tiny graphic in the bottom right? Where you're going to see some very successful ones are going to have them in the middle. And there's going to be a lot of best practices that you can pick up just by looking at which you're interested in and which you're really not. And the same thing is going to be true when somebody comes by your poster, whether it's going to be virtual or not, especially this winter when we're not really sure what's going to happen with COVID. And so you're going to want to make sure that this is a poster that people would want to click on. Now, there's nothing you can do about the template. For example, Iowa, Wisconsin, I think Drake for sure, have a particular template that you would use as a resident that's associated with their school. And you can see that although the template is there, whether it's yellow for Iowa, red for Wisconsin, blue for Drake, you're going to see that there's tremendous variety in what's in the actual poster. And the mistake that I see a lot of people make is trying to make it so that they get as much information as possible in there. And think of it in this way. In a lecture, were you most concerned about getting the most information? Like, was a lecture that had more information a much better lecture than a lecture that had impactful visuals and stories? And so while we're talking about visual rhetoric, really, what we really want to do is say, okay, well, what makes a good poster? What makes a poster appealing? And if you think of maybe the book cover analogy, that's really a good way to do it. So now you've got an interest. This is what topic I might be interested in. And you kind of see just what it's going to look like. So how do you do a rough draft? And we're obviously not going to do a whole residency project, but what you want to do is start thinking broadly about what would be important to you. And just like in movies, there are storyboards where it just takes so much money to actually film the scene that they're going to get an artist, and the artist is going to just kind of sketch out the scene and see if it works out. And we can see a lot of things from that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to sketch out really quickly a rough draft of the objective, the methods, the results, and conclusion. I teach, so because of COVID-19, all of a sudden, we're all going virtual, we're all going online, and I would want to know, okay, well, are my students learning better, worse, or the same online? And the most important and critical mistake that most residents make with their project, and that they find they're in this rabbit hole and it is absolutely a nightmare and they are just beaten down with all of the work they have to do, it's because they made it too broad. That is the number one mistake. They, at the beginning of the project, are like, I'm going to do this thing and we're going to have hundreds to thousands of people that we're going to interview and all of this stuff, because you really have no idea how much time it's going to take. So what you want to do is you want to narrow it, then narrow it again, then narrow it again. Okay? So the first thing I did was say, okay, well, are students learning better, worse, or the same online? Okay, so online versus classroom. I've immediately eliminated some people there. Next, in an introductory laboratory component, okay? So I've now taken half the class away. Now we're only talking about the laboratory component. Focused on calorimetry, okay? So now I've taken away the laboratory component and narrowed it down to a single lab that can be done on a single day. So if we were doing the calorimetry lab, we could, and this is the thing, is that, well, how are you going to replicate that in the classroom? I would have a Bunsen burner, or I wouldn't have a Bunsen burner. I'd have a little piece of foil. I'd have Fritos and on a little paper clip. I would light the Frito. It would heat up the can, which is the calorimeter, with a certain amount of water. And then I could try different things. Okay, well, I could try posting a video of it. I could try finding an interactive way of doing it online. Maybe there's some kind of three-dimensional calorimeter that they can adjust the settings and things like that. And I can just see, okay, well, Okay, so after I've done that, I've kind of thought through about some of the things that I want to do in terms of the actual objective and what I want to focus on. And then I'm starting to work on methods, and you'll see the word perceptions a lot. But I could ask them, the students, well, how do you think you did on the calorimetry experiment? And then if there are questions in the exam on that, I can look at those questions against past data. Now, of course, you'll probably be working with patients rather than students and things like that. But the idea is this. It's really cool to ask people what they think the result is and to actually see what the results are and how those usually don't match at all. So, for example, there's this show about human beings and how they have these perceptions of themselves, and they ask them, how many of the 100 of you think that you are, in the top 50% of good-looking people? And usually 85% stay there. So obviously 85% is much bigger than the top 50%. And the same idea holds true. What makes it interesting is that there's a perception, and that perception of, well, how often do you take your medicine on time? Okay, well, I think I take my medicine on time 90% of the time. Great. The data show that you actually only take your medicine on time 30% of the time. And that's what makes it interesting, because you have this perception, you have this reality, and then you're trying to make that reality into something that is closer to what their perception would be. Then results, you can predict them. So with this, I could just say, okay, well, some will do the same. That is, they'll do just the fine on an online class. Some will do worse. That is, they don't really get it because it wasn't tactile. They didn't get to hold the things. They didn't get to see it happen in front of them. They weren't smelling the chip, whatever it is that makes it really real for them. And then some will do better because maybe they had things in their life that kind of got in the way, and so that is, they were leaving work to go to class and then going back to work, or had to deal with childcare, and now they don't have to do those things. So there's 3 predictions. They're going to do the same, worse, or better, and it's kind of cool to see how that works out. And then the conclusion, you need the results to get the conclusion, but you can start thinking about it. And for example, just in classes right now, I am texting students, which I never did, and except in emergencies. And now I'm texting them like, hey, you missed this. Can you please finish quiz 10.1 or 10.2 or something like that? And so my communication has changed. So from those results, I saw that some did worse, some did the same, and some did better. But then my thought was, okay, well, maybe my communication isn't clear. And if I improve my communication, then we can improve the results, and that goes on to the next study. So to kind of summarize this, to kind of take a real shortcut at a residency project, figuring out your project really comes from looking at hundreds of projects and just seeing what really pops out at you as really interesting. And then when you look at the posters, which ones were attractive to you? Which ones were the ones that you just really gravitated towards? And which ones did you see that you ignored? And what was it about those that you gravitated towards that made it like, wow, having that graphic or 2 or 3 very colorful graphics in the middle with the results was really a good idea. And then you can just write out, and you don't have to make it detailed as you would see in those 300 pages of abstracts. What's the objective? What do you want to do? What methods do you think you're going to do? What results are you probably going to get? And then from those results, what would you do to improve things, or how would you go on to the next project? From that, you can take your kind of storyboard of all of this and start really digging into what projects people have done, and then over the residency period kind of keep looking back and saying, okay, well, how did they do their statistics? How did they set up to succeed at their statistics? Every battle is won and lost before it's ever fought. So working with your advisors, especially if you're an academic in a medical center where you're going to have college faculty that are experts in this, will tell you, yeah, you really don't want to do it that way. You want to do it this way, and this is going to make it much easier. So hopefully these project tips have helped you. Again, if you need help or shortcuts with your writing, I'm always happy to help with those kinds of things. I've expanded from just doing letters of intent to doing cover letters, helping residents with abstracts, and then I've always helped people with applications, but anything that has to do with writing and editing, contact me at tonythepharmacist@gmail.com. It's something that I really enjoy and some people really hate. And for some people, it's absolute just chewing on cold broccoli. But for me, it is absolutely a joy to make writing, even good writing, great. So do contact me if you need help with any of that, or get to residencyhelp.com. Make sure that you're on our email list. Hey, thanks again for listening to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. I do encourage you to go to residencyhelp.com, get on the mailing list. I'll send you out an email every Friday during residency season, but then afterwards, I'll still have a number of episodes on helping you get through residency itself. And then if you're somebody that's looking at residency in the future, I'll also have content for that as well. If you have a question, I'm pretty good about getting back to you. And if I don't have an answer, I will know someone that does. So thanks again for listening to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please do rate and review. It really matters in terms of our ability to reach more people. Thanks again.